Welcome to the Private Equity Exchange, the only summit bridging the gaps between limited partners, private equity funds, corporate executives, and entrepreneurs. With over 1,000 delegates, the Private Equity Exchange is the only venue where LPs, private equity firms, corporate executives, and entrepreneurs meet. Before the events, using our internet platform, schedule one-on-one meetings with delegates that matter most to you, and exchange far more than business cards at your deal meetings at the Private Equity Exchange. Gather great market insight with over 120 speakers and 6 tracks to choose from. The Private Equity Exchange, the largest private equity event in Europe for CEOs, funds, and LPs. You are looking at restructuring and turnaround, restructuring a multinational company, challenges, process, and case study. Introducing
In fact, as you know, our panel will address the challenges which are met in international, multinational restructuring, and we will discuss operational, financial issues, economic, European policies restrictions, as well as insolvency issues. Of course, this will be short because we only have 55 minutes, including your questions, but we will try to give you the more information possible. Our session will be based on another case study as a Eurotunnel, since we will discuss Alstom case, which is known as a very successful restructuring. And we are lucky to have with us someone who lived this restructuring period of Alstom, Stéphane Lecor, who participated to this period and will give us a lot of his experience. Stéphane started his career in Arthur Andersen, and 10 years later he joined Alstom as management control head. And this is in this capacity that he played a very active role in the crisis management, in the restructuring, and of course in the group recovery. We have other panel members who are restructuring practitioners. So first of all, on the left of Stéphane, we have Simon Appel, who is the head of Kroll's European Corporate Advisory and Restructuring Group. Simon had a very large experience of restructuring, and he led large insolvency and corporate turnaround assignments. We have another practitioner with Brian Lochhead. Brian is a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers London. He's within the Business Recovery Services team, and prior joining PwC, he spent 10 years running distressed businesses in the UK and in other world countries. He also led large international financing and restructuring projects. We have also the investor side, which is represented by Nathaniel Meyohas, Sun Capital Vice President. Nathaniel spent the main part of his career in private equities and the investment banking sector, both in London and New York. And he will share some experience with us. Prior to Stéphane's presentation, I would like just to say a quick word on myself. So I'm a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm in charge of business recovery services activities, and my main assignment in this respect has been to assist Alstom during this crisis period with a review of business plans, which has been performed on a half-year basis between 2003 and 2006. So, Stéphane, you can start. Thank you in advance for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dominique, and I will start to say that I spent a lot of time to convince you in 2003 that Alstom was viable, and then you helped us to convince our banks that Alstom was viable, and I'm very happy to see that finally we were right. So you've heard a lot about about Alstom and our story, and I will try in a few minutes to summarize what happened and what we learned. It's a bit challenging in 10 minutes, but I will try to give you the essence of this restructuring. Our crisis became critical in 2003. I said became critical because the crisis started before. It's very difficult to say when the crisis started. And even it's always very difficult for the manager to recognize that there is a crisis. And I would say that in 2003, the crisis became critical because strong and sufficient decisions were not taken before. The main reasons of our crisis are summarized on this slide. First, we faced technical issues with gas turbines that we bought from a competitor, ABB. And because we made not enough and strong due diligences, we were faced with technical problems. And these issues that became critical in 2003 costed us 4.5 billion euros just to solve the technical matters and pay the liquidated damages to our customers. There was an overall underperformance of the businesses of the group of Alstom, which size was 21 billion euros of sales at that time. At the same time, we faced a slowdown in our main market, which was the power generation. I remind you that Alstom today is in power generation and rail transportation. And obviously, the debt was, the balance sheet was a little bit unbalanced, if you can say that. We had a debt of more than 5.6 billion euros for an equity of only 1 billion euros. And the off-balance sheet was quite important because as an important number, the bonds that we had were more than 13 billion euros, which is a huge amount for such a balance sheet and for our activity. And the last point, which is not mentioned here, but maybe to come back to what was said before on Eurotunnel, is that we had no reference shareholder, and I would say that Alstom was on the hands of the hedge funds and or pension funds in the US. The crisis broke out because there is one day where it's really you are very close to bankruptcy. Broke out simply when our banks stopped to issue bonds. And in our activity, we are in a long-term contracting. Bonds are very important to support our commercial activity. We have a negative working capital. So when you stop issuing bonds, that means that you don't receive any more down payments from your customers or progress payments. So then you are in a very difficult cycle where your working capital starts to deteriorate very, very quickly. And in a few weeks, you are big liquidity issues. So there was a big stop of the commercial activity, loss of confidence, which is very important in the long-term contracting, from customers, suppliers, and I would say everybody, including our banks, obviously, because they stopped this to support the group. And the liquidity issues were simply very simple. We are not able to repay the debt that was maturing. When the new CEO, Patrick Cron, came in Alstom in the beginning of 2003, he launched a program, nothing magic, in 4 main areas. The first one was the scope of activities. So we sold more than 45% of the group, which is a little bit difficult because when you start to sell businesses, and that was what was decided before, you have difficulties to sell the profitable ones. So you start to sell the businesses which are not core, and then you are not able to solve the problem. So the main decision of Patrick was to sell good businesses that were key for Alstom, but it was the only solution to gain more than 2 billion euros from the cash inflow from this disposal. So the reason of the disposal was first cash generation, and the second part of the disposal program was because it was imposed by the European Commission because we had a state aid that we received, and I will come back on this, and so we had to dispose more of the business. So the disposal program was first sell profitable business, I would say money over strategy, then to sell what was imposed, and then to refocus the group. And at the end, we sold the businesses that was considered as non-core, as our marine business. There was a big program in the reorganization of group, HR management, clarification of the structure, and all this, which is important. Maybe an important number on the changes in management. Out of the 500 today, of the 500 top managers, today, 300 are new in their position, compared with 4 years ago, which is a very big change. Second part of the program was in the operation. We obviously a deep improvement of the performance and review of all the processes, risk management, selection of projects, which was important. We made a big effort to solve our technical issues on the gas turbine. We spent almost 2 billion to solve the technical issue. And we can say now that we have a very good product, even maybe one of the best in the market. And we launched a strong restructuring program. Our employees have suffered. We have spent more than 1 billion in restructuring, and it was more than 12,000 positions that were that disappeared. On the finance side, we came into a very big restructuring, and it was very complex, and I will not come back on this, but we made 3 capital increases, 4 billion euros, and we entered into several complex financial restructuring with the French state coming in Alstom. The reason why the French state came is because we were in a very urgent and difficult situation where the group was simply collapsing because of the deterioration of our working capital. And we came to see the French state because we had to negotiate with 35 banks. And it's very difficult to negotiate with 35 banks when you know that you have 2 months to survive. Because after 2 months, because of the deterioration of, again, our working capital, customers that wanted to be paid the day they deliver the product or even before, and the customer paying any down payment or progress payment, we had no choice to find a solution in 2 months. And that was why we came to discuss with the French state to say you need to be the catalyst of the negotiation because we are not able to ask to all the banks to come in a room and discuss. And we had very long nights where the French state called our 35 banks, and we had meetings in Bercy where he helped us to say we are here together. We are on Saturday morning. We are here together, and we need to find a solution before the end of the weekend. So it was quite tough in the way, but it was impossible for us to have such a negotiation and such a power in the negotiation. And because we had this aid from the French state, we came to see the European Commission, who wanted to see if we were not disturbing the competition in Europe, and we had tough negotiation with the Commission just after. The main difficulties in such a restructuring, and sorry to be simple, but it's because I don't have much time, is first a number of stakeholders. I mean, you have the 35 banks, your shareholders, your customers, your suppliers, your employees, the European Commission, your competitors. So that's one of the main difficulty. The second main difficulty is the number of challenges, because it was not only a financial restructuring. It's difficult to have only a financial restructuring. You have problems. We had problems everywhere in the operation, in the organization, in the management of the people. So that's why it's complex. The second difficulty is the lack of support and the lack of confidence. You can lose confidence in a month, and it takes years to regain this confidence. And I'm not a specialist of restructuring, but I was in Arthur Andersen, as Dominique said before, and Arthur Andersen collapsed in a month because it lost the confidence from his customers. And it was exactly the case of Alstom. And the reason why the French state came is because there is a domino effect, because as we had, more than 60,000, at that time, we were 100,000 people in Alstom. And as the banks were exposed to 30 billion euros of bonds, if Alstom would collapse, then you would have a problem with all the financial system, because all the customers would have called the 13 billion of bonds that all the banks, 35 banks, among them, most of his exposure was for the French banks. So the French banks would have been called by their customers to repay 13 billion of bonds, which was important. And the other main difficulty is the negotiation with the European Commission, not because they don't understand your issue. I mean, they understand the problem, and I would say they are here to support, even if it's very tough in a nego. But the problem with the Commission is just the timing. They have their own agenda, and when it takes 9 months for them to agree if they will say that they approve the aid you have received, that means that you are during these 9 months, there is a big uncertainty in the process. The main results are here. I will not comment because I'm short of time, but I would say that Alstom now is saved, And we are in a good period, and I would say that even we are surprised by the results today, which is good. As you see, the debt has been reduced significantly, and the results have improved. The last slide is important because it's the key lesson of this restructuring. Can you go to the last slide, please? Yeah, some may think that this is a fight between a French frog and a German predator. And I will not comment on our competitors, but I would say that they have been tough as well in the process. They were coming to our customer not to sell products, but just with press releases saying that in any article it was written that Alstom was in bankruptcy. So you can imagine that it's difficult for a customer to sign a contract where you will deliver the product 5 years after. So it was tough in the negotiation. I mean, I would say that the three reasons why we survived are the first, that we faced the reality. It's very difficult to face the reality, but I think we faced the reality and we took the decision. It's difficult to take decisions, but I think they were taken. The second reason is that we had very solid assets and that all the stakeholders believed in Alstom, even if we had this difficult period. We had a good market position, good products. That's the second reason. And the first reason is that because we never, ever gave up. Thank you very much.
In fact, you have provided us with an ideal case of a successful restructuring, which is not always the case, as you know, both on a financial and operational point of view. You also gave us a good idea of the complexities which are faced when there is such a restructuring and the problems that need to be addressed. We also had an overview of the problem with the European Commission. And finally, this causes a lot of uncertainties. You indicated that it took 9 months to have the approval of the Commission. Finally, it's also important to note that in this case, we saw the importance of a French state who was here finally to give time to Alstom, because of course it brought equity, it brought some short-term facilities, it brought some bonding, but this also permitted Alstom, who still had to do that, to restructure its financial long-term debt, to deliver its operational turnaround, which was very important, and of course to restore confidence of the various stakeholders and moreover the customers. So I think that each restructuring is different, and maybe it would be useful to have the advice of some members of the panel on this financial restructuring and on the trends that we are going to see in the future. So maybe, Brian, you can give us an overview.
Thank you, Dominique. And thank you, Stefan. That was extremely interesting. I wasn't involved in the case, and I think to have some of these key messages were absolutely great. I suppose Alstom in itself was slightly different, given the impact that the government had in trying to reach a solution, which is rather unusual in the sort of deals that we see day in, day out. Just by way of an introduction to the panel, I suppose I'd like to pick on 5 things that really I think are quite common in most restructurings, and then through the course of the panel I think we'll build on some of these points. I think the first point, which comes out of both Alstom and Eurotunnel, is that restructurings are increasingly cross-border. Now, they're cross-border both in terms of the companies that are affected and the stakeholders that are within those situations. And again, we've enumerated a number of the stakeholders that can be affected. And as we may be seeing signs of weakening economies in the Western world, with potentially interest rates rising, potentially elections in various key countries, so who knows how that may affect the confidence of the market, we've got to be ready to see potentially some cross-border issues cropping up again. Most businesses operate globally, and therefore that is important. And because of those issues, I think Eurotunnel shows it, and Alstom shows it, it's important to try and reach a consensus because it's going to be more difficult to try and go down a more of an insolvency route, which may not be necessarily negative, and I know Simon will touch upon Comey and other matters, but consensual issues are more important given the globality and the complexity of situations. The other point is, the second point would be the emergence of new liabilities. The most striking example of that, and for those of you who've been involved in UK cases recently, is the emergence of issues related to pensions. A few years ago, nobody would have thought that pensions was a particularly big issue. Now, in all the cases that we're seeing at the moment, and those include international cases that have UK operations, the pensions creditor is becoming a huge stakeholder. There are also issues related to longer-term liabilities. For example, asbestos. I was involved in a case a couple of years ago, Cape PLC, that had a massive asbestos issue, which was impacting its strategy. So there's new things that come out and really are born out of the complexity of the businesses that we're seeing. The third point is the wider stakeholder group. And I suspect a lot of you, a couple of years ago, may not have come to this particular track on restructuring. There's a lot more people involved in restructuring. There's a lot more entrance into the sector. And I think that means there's a lot more objectives that need to be catered for, quite often different objectives. And therefore, that is a critical aspect of restructurings going forward. They're international, they're diverse, and the world's moved on. I remember early restructurings 4 or 5 years ago. You had a group of banks, you had to negotiate with a syndicate of banks. Sometimes you had some bondholders. That was probably as far as the complexity went. Now you've got differing stakeholders. You've got people buying into the debt, buying into the equity, buying in for short periods of time. And as Jacques Gounon was saying, he doesn't know who half of his bondholders are. Well, that's a reality. And in fact, those bondholders today may not be the same ones tomorrow. So that doesn't make life easier. Fourth point is the emergence of the CRO model. I think more and more situations have new management teams, have got management teams that are augmented by the introduction of a CRO. And therefore, that is a key aspect of how restructurings happen at the moment. And if you look at some of the larger situations, you will see that CRO are introduced. I'm heavily involved in the restructuring of sea containers at the moment. And again, we've got a couple of individuals there who have come in to try and resolve the situation. And there's many more examples which hopefully we'll pick on later on. So picking up on those 4 points, we get to the final point. So we've got increasingly cross-border, new liabilities, new stakeholders and wider stakeholders, CRO and management teams that have an integral part to play. Well, that often means that restructurings are more complex and take more time. And you all know that it takes longer to work through a situation. So I think those are probably the five key points that maybe we can start building on, Dominique.
Yes, you are right, Ryan. And in fact, I would like to ask a question to Simon regarding the complexity which is generated by more parties involved in a restructuring. What do you think of that? Do you think that it's a problem, or that sometimes it can help the restructuring to have more parties involved?
Well, I think we need to look at the different types of parties that are involved. I mean, as Brian said, the number of financial stakeholders have been increasing, and it's been increasing dramatically. But with that, of course, has come more liquidity and more options. And I think it's fair to say that because of that, a number of companies that in the past probably would have failed have now been restructured. And that's got to be a good thing. I think that has to be a good thing. But there are complexities and difficulties that come with dealing with all these different parties. It's probably just worth exploring just a little bit more some of the points that Brian made, because with the different parties there are different expectations. Different parties have different agendas, and trying to build consensus and cooperation is critical, and it was the point that was made earlier on Eurotunnel. So if we think about some of the different stakeholders, we've clearly got the management team, and the management team play seems to me a couple of key, probably two key important roles in this. First of all, they are going to be the team that need to put in place the plan going forward. So there needs to be confidence that the team are structured and have the capabilities to actually be able to deliver on the plan that has formed the basis for the restructuring. And, you know, as Brian mentioned, in some of the interim stages, it might be that you need some kind of assistance, some chief restructuring officer to assist them through the actual restructuring, but ultimately you have to have a team in place that can deliver the plan in the long term. In the shorter term, of course, it's the management team that are responsible for developing the projections, the numbers, the data on which the financial restructuring will be based. And so there has to be confidence in those numbers being right and being a stable platform in which to restructure the business. And I think we've all seen cases where the numbers that have been produced start to be, there are iterations of it, and inevitably they get worse, not better, and that just causes delay in the whole process. There's then the board, and it can be separate from the management team, and I think it's important to differentiate those, and to ensure that the board are bought in and have backing to ensure that there's confidence, again, that there is a platform in which to build the build the restructuring. The creditor group and the financial creditors are certainly an area that take some handling. We talked a little bit earlier about just the increased numbers of the different financial creditors, the different and increasing number of layers of debt, the fact that some of the financial creditors are simply not known. And, of course, that a number of them have come into these situations at different times. So their entry points are different, and therefore the way that they will view what a successful exit looks like will, of course, differ too. We mentioned earlier, Brian mentioned pension funds. I think there are other sort of outsiders, if you like, who are now starting to have an influence on these restructurings and need to be managed. And it was interesting when we were talking about the Eurotunnel case before, when they're saying that there's been no government support. Well, I think that may be the case, but there is no question that the political ramifications are huge. And it's not just on a case like Eurotunnel that has an impact. And we're seeing cases where authorities, it might be the tax authorities, for example, are playing to their own agenda because they themselves see there being a concern as to some of these new financial stakeholders entering the business, which they may be worried about. They're not. I'm not convinced that some of these French authorities, for example, like the idea of US hedge funds owning big parts of their automotive industry, and they're making life a little bit difficult. Now, what does that mean? Well, the result is that it is more complex. It means that it's taking longer. I mean, it wasn't long ago that I think the average case would be somewhere between, I don't know, you might guess 3 to 6 months to restructure a business. It's now much longer, maybe closer to 6 to 12 months, perhaps. And of course, with that length of time, it's also becoming much, much more expensive. Each of these different layers of stakeholders tend to have separate advisors, and it's very much now in Europe like the US model that we've seen before. Enormous numbers of advisors, enormous number of costs. And I suspect that that's going to have to change, actually. I think we're coming to a stage soon where it is just simply becoming too expensive to do this. And I expect that there will be a case where some advisors will, or some stakeholders will see that in fact their interests are pretty aligned, and therefore it makes much more sense to have advisors to look at a number of different stakeholders at the same time. That's a very long way of answering the question. That I do think that these additional stakeholders, I think it is good, but I think it's coming at a cost. And I think we need to be careful to manage that cost, because if it gets too much more expensive, then maybe the scales will turn.
Maybe we could go a little wider in the debate and see what's about operational restructuring. Is it now easier or not? We saw that financial restructuring take more and more time, is more and more expensive. Nathaniel, do you have an idea to share with us regarding this? And maybe Stéphane will have something to add on this part.
Sure. I'll just say a couple of things on what my colleague said. And I'm going to state the obvious, but from the investor side, we always prefer to focus our energy and our resources on a deal that has a high likelihood of getting done. And a deal that has too much complexity, too many stakeholders, too many different creditors with different pieces of collateral and therefore different aims and different rankings makes a deal too complicated for us and will generally make us shy away because there's plenty of other deals where we can focus our energy more efficiently. So I think the role of the advisors here is actually crucial in helping simplify a situation and bringing it to the investor in a as simple a package as possible, because our preference is always going to be to buy 100% of the shares of a company, at least for Sun Capital, 100% of the shares of a company on a debt-free basis, and just pay one check, and I'd rather let the creditors and the shareholders fight it amongst themselves for the proceeds. I don't really want to get involved, and this creditor should get 70 cents, but this one should get 60, and the shareholder doesn't want to give up control. The ideal situation for us is just not to get involved, someone to deliver us the keys on a debt-free basis. And that's why I think the role of the advisors here is actually crucial. In the restructuring world, we're talking here only about difficult situations. We're not talking about healthy LBOs. We're not talking about 5 times EBITDA companies. In difficult situations, there is a value for the company. And the value is different. The value to us means how much capital do we need to put in to buy this company and then to fix it. And so there's a total pot, and let's give an example that the total pot is 100. Very often in the deals we do, the amount of money we need to invest into the company to fund the restructuring plan is greater than the purchase price. So there's a balance. Pensions, for example, to me that's purchase price. It's not something that I'm paying to the seller, but it's part of the 100 that I need to allocate. Restructuring costs, severance payments is part of the value, is part of my enterprise value, so therefore it's going to be a deduction of the purchase price. Operational restructurings are possible. Maybe they take longer than they do in the US. Maybe in France it's more expensive than it is in the UK. Maybe in Germany it's more difficult than it is in Spain, for example. But restructurings are possible. You just got to, when you're making your investment analysis, make sure you double the cost and double the amount of time that you think it's going to take you to do. And don't underestimate the importance of presidential elections when you're trying to do a restructuring plan. But that's the basic message. You can do what you need to do in a company. It might be a little bit more expensive and it might take a little bit more time. But there's no people who say, "Oh, you can't do restructuring plans in France, and it's very difficult to fire people in Germany." Yeah, of course you can, but it's just more expensive than it might be in other countries.
I will just add something on the operational restructuring. I don't think there is a difference, or we need to separate financial restructuring and operational restructuring. I mean, if you have a financial problem, that means that I would say in most cases you have an operational problem, and I think that's why you should consider both at the same time, because that means you have underperformance in some areas in your businesses and you should improve them. On operational restructuring, I think in most cases, I mean, I've not seen many cases, but some, it can be a very good opportunity. And I would say that in the case of Alstom, we are stronger today than where we were before. I mean, just an example in terms of restructuring plans. We have implemented restructuring plans. I was mentioning 1 billion euros that we spent. And we have implemented restructuring plans, first because we had overcapacity, because I was mentioning that we were facing some slowdown in the market, so we had overcapacity. But we have used this restructuring plan to reduce our capacity in Europe, increase significantly our capacity in Eastern Europe, in China, India, where we are quite present today. And that's why I would like to mention that this is an opportunity to reconsider, because you are in a mood where there is a sense of urgency, and there is a good ground to reconsider the way you were doing your business over the last 20 years, and it's a good ground to prepare the future. And I said in my conclusion that we were surprised, and we are surprised in Alstom to be in such a situation today. I think it's because we have invested in the future. I think that's important to say on the operational restructuring.
So we have concentrated on consensual restructuring, but there is also another world, which is the world of insolvency. So it would be very interesting to hear our panel on this subject. And first of all, I would like to ask this question to Brian. Is insolvency a value destroyer, or is it really that bad, or can it bring something to companies?
It's an interesting question that you ask me, Dominique, because I'm not an insolvency practitioner.
I know.
So the easy answer from me would be, because I don't know too much about insolvency and I don't generate most of my business by managing through insolvencies, it has to be a bad thing. But that's a simple answer. I think insolvency can be a means to get to a solution, because insolvency doesn't necessarily. And if we pick up on what Jacques Gounon was saying, he was mentioning something about, work on distressed but not destroy. I think there is a misunderstanding if we believe that insolvency is about destroying. And I think Simon will touch upon insolvency can be very much a way to get through to a solution and to work through a solution. In the UK, there has been a resurgence of things called pre-packs, that effectively you use insolvency as a vehicle to work through a situation. Even that the insolvency laws in the UK are now much more focused in saving the business and the operations rather than the way it was done before, which was a bit of a be-all and end-all of a company. So I think it can be a very positive way of getting through a restructuring and helping, picking up on what Stéphane was saying, how do you actually have a new company springing out of a restructuring with a new way that works compared to the one that didn't work. But I don't know, Simon, if you want to build on that and add on that.
Can comment and also explain us whether the COMI rules can help or not in this situation.
Well, I think maybe you should be an insolvency practitioner. You're speaking very positively about it. I am an insolvency practitioner, and I do have a slightly different view. But I think it's very difficult to be generic about whether insolvency is a bad thing or not. I mean, certainly, insolvency brings with it a number of risks. I mean, one of the key issues for the stakeholders when they're in a restructuring and they're considering insolvency is the fact that they could lose control. Because as soon as there's an insolvency process, an insolvency practitioner is involved, and of course that practitioner it brings in another stakeholder that may have yet another agenda, so it's complicated. And of course, in many jurisdictions, the stakeholders have no influence or control over who the insolvency practitioner is going to be. And of course, the second point which Dominic raised was this idea that it's a huge value destroyer, and there's a massive stigma around insolvency. Well, I think sometimes, and it is only sometimes, but I think sometimes this is overplayed. And I think it's overplayed because it's often the threat of insolvency that is the tipping point to actually get a consensual restructuring plan done. And we know that because we have been brought into cases where, our job is to build up the contingency plan. It can look pretty horrible, and therefore parties think, well, we better knock heads together and get this things done. Now, there are a number of cases, I think, where the insolvency practitioner and the financial stakeholders may, in fact, be aligned. So I think there are cases where they can have the same agenda. If you are fortunate enough to be in the right jurisdiction, you can have control over who the insolvency practitioner is. So, the risk of having some lunatic taking control of the business goes away. And I think that because now the amount of information that is becomes public on restructurings. DebtWire, you get information on DebtWire within minutes of restructuring meetings. The extent of distress of businesses is in the public domain. And so when years ago restructurings were done behind the scenes and it was all very quiet, and if it was an insolvency, it suddenly became a big surprise, and that was one of the issues that drove down value. I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think the gap between the two has reduced. And as Brian mentioned, the whole idea about pre-packs means that, in fact, the issue around value destruction may not, and again, it depends on the case, may not be a critical issue. So I think all of those issues, combined with the fact that insolvency processes now can be pretty quick. You know, we've talked about some of these restructurings taking, 12 months. You can get a restructuring process done much more quickly. So with the added flexibility, I'm not sure that insolvency always has to be a bad thing, but on balance, it would be a last resort. Now, you mentioned COMI as well,
yes,
Centre of Main Interest, and I'm conscious of the time, so to sort of go through Centre of Main Interest in 2 or 3 minutes is a bit of a challenge. But perhaps just a couple of key points. I think the first is that the whole Centre of Main Interest area has been taken in practice much further than it was ever envisaged that it would when the rules and the laws were put in place. There is certain vagueness in the rules which have been exploited. And that means that we are dealing with situations that I don't think were ever envisaged. Now, I use the word exploited, and of course that has connotations of things being done for the wrong reasons. I don't think that's the case. I think in the majority of the bigger cases, the cases in the public domain, the rules have been exploited for the right reasons. They've been exploited to try and get the best result for creditors. So I think that is a good thing. And COMI has proved to be extremely powerful. The ability to be able to hold together a group across Europe. And in fact, it could be bigger than that too, because if you can link up a US Chapter 11 with a European COMI filing, you can cover a huge territory, all of the US and all of Europe, and you can hold a group together. Now that can definitely mean that you can continue to trade the business where that might not have been possible before. It means that you can get a disposal of the business on a group basis as opposed to a breakup basis. And importantly, it puts the insolvency practitioner on the same footing as some of the stakeholders that deal with the group. So customers and suppliers will often deal with a group on a group basis, whereas if you try and break down a group and try and deal with those customers and suppliers on individual basis, then your strength of your negotiation strength reduces. And the case that we were involved with, Collins and Aikman, 24 plants, 10 countries across Europe. That business was held together. It was sold as a group. 3,000 people remained employed. I'm absolutely convinced that that would not have been possible unless there'd been a COMI filing. So it can work, but the practicalities mean that it can be very tough because there's all sorts of complications that we haven't got time to go through now. But one of the key issues, I think, is the difference in rules and the difference in the legislation. We talked about it earlier, the local legal constraints that that happen between where the COMI filing is and between where all of the businesses operate can be critical. And the bigger the difference is, the more likely it is that there's going to be secondary proceedings, and that brings on a whole nother chapter of issues.
I think that we can discuss a long time on all these subjects, but our time is not enormous now, and I would like to you to have the opportunity to ask questions if you have questions to this panel. So please, we are listening to your questions. If you don't have any question, I have one last question for Nathaniel.
We prepared this earlier.
So you know what the question is?
Yeah.
Well, so I will ask
the question is...
Oh, thank you, Nathaniel.
The question is, if you look in your crystal ball, what's going to happen in 2007? And the answer is God knows. But, there's obvious sectors which are... sectors which are going through change are the sectors where you're going to see restructuring activity. And it sounds obvious, but the auto sector, the textile sector, those are all sectors that are going through big changes, big industrial changes, big manufacturing changes, big distribution changes. So there's going to be some movement there. And I also think you'll see that a lot of the restructurings which have been done this year and which were done last year will come back again next year, because maybe the first wave wasn't aggressive enough in its restructuring and was trying to be too consensual, that the same companies will come back again next year.
I think when you look at the other sessions that are running around the corner here in the corridor, there's obviously one about private equity and leveraged buyouts. And I was talking to one of my transaction partners yesterday who was suggesting that they were looking at a deal where the debt offer was over 10 times EBITDA. We don't know what's going to happen to interest rates and to the various economies, but that's got to bring some sort of issues in terms of restructuring, and probably pretty quickly, because I know there's liquidity, but people can't continue to pay those sorts of deals, the sorts of prices that they're putting on the table.
That's our pipeline.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to the panel members.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
the
Dominique.
session will continue.